Shabbat Shalom, everyone. So a while ago, Meredith and I were in the middle of a heated conversation. And of course, it was over something very, very important, something very serious. It was over what Netflix series we were going to start watching together. Now, before you laugh, this is very important, right? We both work a lot. We both have a lot of hours that we put in during the week, and we have very, very precious hours that we reserve just for us. So the idea of us spending that time together watching something on Netflix, but not one of us not enjoying it, is just something that we try to avoid altogether. But we were pushing for our different agendas. I wanted to watch something, she wanted to watch something, but suffice to say, she won. And she chose a show called Dead to Me on Netflix. And we started watching this, me begrudgingly, and then a little bit with a little bit of cynicism and pessimism, and she was excited. And immediately we fell in love with the show. And I rarely say that. But this is such an interesting show. So I'm going to do a little bit of a plug this morning for it because I think everyone should watch it, but I also want to say something a little anecdotally about it. So without going into too much detail about the show itself, here's the premise. Two women meet at a grief and loss support group. One of the women has lost her husband to a hit-and-run driver who ran her husband over, drove off, and was never found. And this other woman lost her husband to illness. And even though they're coming at their grief in two very different ways, the two start talking to one another and quickly form a friendship, a bond that is a little wacky, a little awkward, but ultimately endearing. But we see very, very quickly, and it's really hard to not give out any spoilers because every single episode is filled with cliffhangers and things that kind of put you through a twist and a turn. So without any spoilers, we'll say that the show itself, in its ikar, in its essence, goes to show that the relationship between these two women is actually much more complicated and much more fraught than we were previously led to believe. And the whole thing is actually about tshuva. It's about doing repentance. It's about the idea of hitting our chest and making tikkun, of having some kind of idea that there is something that has been broken and not stopping at anything to make sure that it's fixed. That's what the show's about in its essence. Now, I could talk about the show for the rest of the morning, but I want to go and give you a little bit of an anecdote because I think this is the most telling part. So immediately after we watched the show, I went and spent a weekend in Montreal for the Rabbinical Assembly, which meets every single year and is an opportunity for conservative rabbis to get together to study some texts, to celebrate the accomplishments of our colleagues, but also it's an opportunity to really put our heads together and to have some conversations about the future of conservative Judaism. And more often than not, when we go to the Rabbinical Assembly, the takeaway is usually something from a really good panel discussion. So there might have been a panel discussion about technology or artificial intelligence or about how to do radical engagement work and networking and these different things that leave good conversations when you leave the convention. They're little nuggets that we take away that we can hopefully use in our rabbining. But this convention was different. And it was different because at breakfast, at lunch, and at dinner, all throughout the weekend, at every table, there were rabbis talking about their high holiday sermons and about how this show was going to feature prominently in them. Now listen, Jews like TV, right? We like to be able to have our pop culture references, and there is something, I'm not going to take anything away from the show because it really is a fantastic show. The writing is good, the acting is good, the production value is great. But there's something special about this. There's something unique about this show that seems to speak to the Jewish psyche. To have a bunch of Jews so excited about a TV show, and not just Jews, rabbis, getting so excited that they are going to write their high holiday sermons based on a Netflix TV show. There's something powerful there. And when I watched it and I analyzed it, I realized what it is. I realized what's at this nugget, this main heartbeat of this show that resonates so deeply with us. And you're going to think I'm joking, but hear me out. The word that comes to mind is stubbornness. Stubbornness. We are a stubborn people. That's who we are. And I want to make a big dichotomy because there are two different ways to be stubborn, right? There's the stubbornness that we don't really love so much, that we don't really want associated with us. The stubbornness that means being the nudnik and crossing our arms and not responding and digging our heels into the sand. That's one way of being stubborn. But there's another way of being stubborn too. And I think this is what is unique to the Jewish people. We have a special type of stubbornness that I call a sacred stubbornness. A theological stubbornness. It is a stubbornness that we see something broken in this world. Broken with our relationships, broken with family members, broken with our relationship with God maybe, and we don't let it go. And we never stop trying to fix it. That is sacred stubbornness. That's chutzpah. But it's holy chutzpah. That is the stubbornness that we read about in our Torah portion this week when the Israelites come and say that they want a Pesach Sheni. They want a second Passover for some of them because some of them didn't get to do the mitzvah on the first go. Can you imagine that? That is stubbornness. To be able to say, I missed the mitzvah, and instead of being like, oh well, to demand from God that he has Passover again. That's Jewish. That is sacred stubbornness. And the stubbornness that exists in this TV show, that exists in the conversations with the rabbis here, was an opportunity for them to talk about what tshuva really means. And tshuva, unique to Judaism, in all Western religions, does not mean that we get a pass. That we don't get to just say to someone, I'm sorry, I've said my piece, I did my part, if you don't forgive me, too bad. We don't have that. Our tradition tells us that we are supposed to go at least 3 times to someone if we have wronged them, if we have hurt them in any way, and we are supposed to confront them with a pure heart and a full heart, without any apathy, with sincerity, and we are supposed to say, I am truly sorry for what I've done. And if you won't forgive me, then I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to make it up to you and to find a way to make this better. And maybe I can't. And maybe I won't. But that doesn't mean that I'm ever going to stop trying. That is sacred stubbornness. When we see injustice in the world, when we see things that we know in our heart of hearts are wrong, that go against what we believe as Jews, that go against what we believe as people, about goodness, about dignity. That's sacred stubbornness. When we fight against that, and we never stop. One of my favorite teachings from all of the rabbinical texts is from Pirkei Avot, where we learn that the day is long, the work is hard, but we are not allowed to desist from the work, nor are we obligated to complete it. This is what we do. Each and every single day, we as Jews fight with all of our strength to continue down that path of sacred stubbornness, to never let it go. And we don't give in with this idea that good enough exists. And that is one of the most beautiful things I could possibly think of in Judaism, that there's no such thing as good enough. There's always an opportunity to do better, to fix, to dig in and to make sure that we are trying as hard as we possibly can. There was an image that was going around the internet a couple of years ago, which I just loved. There was this movement to try to get more men to go see their doctors to talk about heart conditions. So all over the country there are these big billboards, and you can see them some in the suburbs as well, but there's these big billboards that say, thousands of men this year are going to die from stubbornness. Right? And it's supposed to be, go talk to your doctor, don't be stubborn. You have a medical obligation to go take care of yourself. That's the other kind of stubbornness, right? But what made the picture that was so great on the internet that was going around is that someone graffitied underneath it, "No, we won't." Which is just so telling. But that's a different type of stubbornness. And if I were to rewrite this billboard with the Jewish people in mind, I would make a big billboard right outside of Shaarey Zedek that would say, "This year, countless Jews will live through stubbornness." It's what gives us life. It's what makes us who we are. It is the stubbornness that can bring a community of people who graduated high school with each other to come celebrate this morning on Shabbat. It is stubbornness to let us know that we are going to continue to be a people that looks after one another no matter where we are spread out throughout this city, throughout this country, throughout this world. And it is a sacred stubbornness that tells us that the things that we need to fix in our lives, whatever they might be, for each of us, are things we are going to pursue, and we will never, ever relent. So my blessing for all of us this morning on this Shabbat is that we embrace that second type of stubbornness. The first one we can do without. We don't need that first type. But that sacred stubbornness, let's hold on to it. Let's remember that it is what makes us who we are. And if anyone wants to do a little extra homework, recommend Dead to Me on Netflix. It's really good. And as we go into this Shabbat, to think about all the ways that we can continue working, that our stubbornness can make us holier, that can make us grow, and can make us the better versions of ourselves that we want to be. Shabbat Shalom.